Good morning, everyone. It's a great pleasure for me to introduce today Dr. Nicole Miglio. She teaches at the University Statale of Milano, and today she's going to present a very interesting paper on with the title, Is That My Baby? Making Sense of the Image Making in Ultrasound Practices. So thank you so much, Nicole, for accepting this invitation for the cycle of webinars in bioethics at Cal State University Bay. The floor is all yours. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Susie. Can you hear me properly? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, thank you for this very, very kind invitation. I'm really, really thrilled to be here today and to present to you guys this new strand of my research that actually I'm working on, and that's gonna be part of a chapter for a book I'm developing and writing in Italian. So the title of my presentation Is That My Baby? Making Sense of the Image Making in Ultrasound Practices. That's the plan of today's talk. In the very first section, I will try to address the issue of visualizing data. So what is visualization? How visualization matters in case of ultrasound practices. So this part is more concerned with media archaeology and, generally speaking, medical humanities. And it's, let's say, the conceptual part that grounds all my reflections around ultrasound practices. And in the second section, we then address the very concept, the enactive concept of sense making. And we try to apply that to the case of ultrasound practices for questioning in what sense what we see on the ultrasound screening may actually have some meaning for the pregnant person and potentially for all people looking at the ultrasound screen. And in the very last and third question, my provocative question is, do you see what the machine wants you to see? So I'm just gonna try to interrogate in which sense we may say that the ultrasound machine embodies and embedded some moral values that, of course, become some ethical issues in interpersonal relationship. Without further ado, let's go asking what visualizing data means. So first of all, I want to present these three pictures, and my question is, what does images have in common? So as you may see, the very first picture, this one, depicts a typical setting of an ultrasound screening. So we may see actually the practitioner with the machine, the probe working on the surface of the skin patient, and here in the background, the screen where we actually know that at some point something will appear, and specifically some shapes that the practitioner recognizes as a fetus. The second picture actually is the one of a baby picture properly, even if prima facie, what you see is not a baby, but there are simply some grayscale shapes and a background, which actually is part of the pregnant person body. But of course, this is another issue. And on the third one, this is our anti-abortionist propaganda flyer, and we're gonna read it together. Which of these two human beings was conceived in rape? And which of these children does not have the right to live? So in this case, you may see the anti-abortionist rhetorics at its finest. So the question that is posed is about the pictures deployed. And again, the pictures here are the one of a 2D scan ultrasound. So we can't know what stages of pregnancy the person is, neither what weeks these fetuses are. But here we actually have, I do believe, to unveil rhetorical presupposition that tell us something about the use of ultrasound pictures in this particular scenario. Because actually, the ultrasound scans depict some fetuses that, in this case, are reported to be human beings. And in the second part of the flyer, the fetuses are identified with children. So there is this passage, this identification between fetus and baby, which is called sometimes in the technical literature infantilization, that rely on the visual register of ultrasound. So anti-abortionist propaganda in this flyer use the ultrasound image, which is not properly a picture, a photograph, as we will see during my presentation, as if they were pictures of a baby. So not the fetus still in the womb, but as a baby already born in the world. For grasping how this is problematic and how many bioethical issues this kind of depiction arise, we have to step back and considering the relationship between diagnostic imaging and cultural imaginary. So we're talking about diagnostic imaging. We are referring to a large, quite broad family of biomedical images or scientific pictures. And the very typical character of biomedical imaging is that through techniques and technologies, the machines can grasp inner parts of human being's body and then can actually unveil some inner parts that we cannot see with naked eyes. So thanks to technological mediation, we are able to have a peculiar access to one's body. And this case is quite popular. So, of course, that is X-rays scan, and you can appreciate actually the bones, the very shape of the bones, and you can't see that with naked eye. So that's the machine working as a process, as a particular mediation that discovers something that we can't see in the world without technological mediation. And I'd say that this picture is almost iconic because this is Berta Röntgen's hand. Berta was the wife of Röntgen, the person who actually discovers X-ray. So this kind of image, as Cartwright reports, was so popular in New York City and in the US at that time that every lady of the upper classes wanted to take pictures of their hand. And also you can also appreciate this, stylistic detail because through X-ray, you can also, have the view of the ring, for example. So there's also some sociological and cultural presupposition words towards marriage and gender-related question. And so this particular case may help us to show how diagnostic imaging is situated in a relationship, in interplay, actually, with cultural imaginary. So we may actually see a hand here because we know that this is a hand and that's the typical stylistic details that we see through X-ray. And on my actually right, we have a brain, even if prima facie it doesn't seem a brain. And if we show this picture, for instance, to someone who is very young or very old, this person may not recognize this brain as such. That's because actually in our cultural imaginary, we are in some sort used to consider this kind of different color, shape, and size as a brain. To be true, this one is a pet of a normal brain on Google. So I simply Googled normal brain pet, and that's the result. So there's a huge debate about brain imaging and neurofallacy and all this debate concerning how this brain is not our brain, but this is only a depiction or a representation of some processes. We're going to arrive at. But at this point, what I really like to give it for granted is that we cannot think diagnostic imaging without cultural imaginary. And as detailed by Pinotti and Somaini, imaging, far from constituting a neutral and objective access to body reality, is intertwined with imagining to the dimension of imagination and imaginary. So I won't go in that direction, but we should keep in mind that biomedical imaging is in some sort dependent and or better intertwined. So there is a codependencies with imagining and with cultural, common, and social imaginary. And that, of course, applies also to our case studies, which is fetal ultrasound. Okay. So again, are these processes of image making far from being neutral, image-making processes rely on epistemic and aesthetic values that impact upon the effect that the produced images have on viewers. So image-making processes, namely all the technical and technological processes that underlies the final production of the image, are not neutral, but depend and, on the contrary, shape some cultural, collective, and social, and also political beliefs and presuppositions. So at this stage, we are facing three different axes. The first one is how those images are displayed in the diagnostic settings. And it is a full investigation per se, because those images are actually showed or not displayed to the person, because sometimes the pregnant person may see that directly. Sometimes, for fully understanding what is depicted, specifically in case of 2D scans, one has to rely completely on the practitioner. So one needs to being explained what I'm watching at. The second axis is how their kind of images are diffused through media. So which is the use that media do of that kind of images, and why this could be problematic, especially for political and epistemic agency of women. And the third axis is to what extent these images impact patients' decision making, because those images may have, as we're gonna actually see at the very end of this presentation, some important possible effects of decision making. So, and yeah, that's it. Okay, before addressing the sense making, there's another important caveat to highlight at this point. The fact that contemporary diagnostic imaging are not photographs stricto sensu, because they do not represent something that is on the visual realm, something that we can see with our eyes, but the technological and technical mediation is so strong and so impactful that at the end, we completely lose reference with what's in the real world. And that's part of an article I wrote with my colleague Giulio Galimberti, working on thermal imaging. And even if ultrasound and thermal imaging are two different technologies that have structural and epistemic different access to the human body, we actually found out that some common points may help us to rethink properly this category of biomedical technologies. So the first point is that, as we said, contemporary diagnostic imaging makes visible some bodily activities that have nothing to do with the visual realm, nor are they detected by lenses or prostheses that intercept signals from the visible electromagnetic spectrum. What does it mean, actually? It means that, for instance, ultrasound, as the name suggests, work with ultrasound and not with sight. At the same time, for instance, thermal imaging works with heat, with change of temperature, and not with the visual, with the sights, with the eyes. So by presenting image data as functional mediation between a molecular phenomenon, so a phenomenon that we cannot appreciate with our eyes, and our genuine human perception, diagnostic practice provides a specific epistemic key for accessing our bodies. So these technologies are not neutral in this sense that they have some mechanical, some technical, rules and presupposition then are expressed in the final output, which is a visual final output, which is an image. So each image actually functions as a rhetorical device that implements a more or less deliberate selection of parameters according to which it reduces and models data that are not mere facts to be reported. So a couple of slides ago, I showed you the example of a pet. Okay, all those colors do not exist in reality. Our brain has not this color, but algorithm softwares add this color in order to make this visual output understandable and useful for diagnostic reasons. In talking about ultrasound, then I said previously that ultrasound scans are not photographs, and nonetheless, they are sometimes employed as if they were photographs. For that reason, it could be useful to think about some of the, let's say, pillar concepts that may help us to rethink also the way in which lay people see and understand ultrasound scans, and in particular, the way in which lay people believe, let's say, to the reality and the truth that ultrasound scans may eventually bring with them. So the first one is the concept of the myth of photographic truth. So it's the actual idea that photographs may witness the reality, and that the technological mediation that bring a particular frame of the world into the machine and that into the images is the one of truth. So what we can see actually is the possibility to witness the reality. As the author in particular point out that the photographic medium has traditionally been associated with the realistic presupposition that pictures display true portion of reality, and the related idea that pictures are then witnesses of such reality. So a classical example in this case is, of course, Cesare Lombroso, for instance, and the use of photographs as a medium to grasp some aspects that are impossible to fully appreciate in vivo, but they need to be, let's say, print on the machine and on the paper. And again, Cartwright, right, that this is quite misleading, given that also photographs imply necessarily subjective intervention, even in cases where it doesn't seem to be like that. In fact, some kind of images give the impression of being the result of merely mechanical gaze with no human intervention at all. So some images seems to be like objective, as we see, and truth, just because there's no human intervention. It's again Cartwright that report the already classical example of dashboard cameras, CCTV surveillance, and drone videos, of which aesthetical setting, like the focus and the framing, I quote, are made to seem chosen by the camera itself, insofar as they are part of the decision-making black box into the apparatus. So apparatuses are not objective in the sense that the machine does the things by itself. Okay, the machine has a sort of subjective dimension that Cartwright reports in case of premise and focus, for instance. This goes quite smoothly with the idea of objectivity as addressed by Destin and Gallison. And they in particular are talking about scientific images and the relationship between scientific images and objectivity. And they write, I quote, "To be objective is to aspire to knowledge that bears no trace of the knower, knowledge unmarked by prejudice and skill, fantasy or judgment, wishing or striving. Objectivity is blind sight, seeing without inference, interpretation, or intelligence." So if we consider these two ideas together, one may say is actually that ultrasound pictures, let's say, have the same criteria for being recognized as witness of a reality and objective gaze into uterine life. But that's why I'm just considering here just a little bit Parika and Prasad. But to be true, as already say, that there's a particular paradoxical shift between visuality and non-visuality, because even if we see images, the final output, so is the image, is the baby pictures, or the process and the raw data from where the process of image making is done, are not visual. So we are dealing with a quite disorientating, I would say, scenario when some not visual inputs become visual, and it seems to be prima facie like, yeah, okay, yeah, that's a baby. I can see that baby because that's a picture of the baby. But as we may see, that's part of the visual that I won't go in that direction that Prasad, for instance, defines cyber visuality. So there's this huge debate actually right now about biomedical imaging and visuality. And we're gonna see actually why that's important and still matters to us right now. So the first question is if our ultrasound scans pictures, because I say that they're picture, but they're not so pictures. So that's gonna be, a journey, try to reply to this question. So what you see now is actually, sorry, it's become, okay. It's the first in the world that tested fetal ultrasound, published in 1958, as you may see, from Ian Donald. And okay, with our today gaze, it's very difficult to see a child here, neither a fetus. But when actually these images become popular, firstly in medical debates and then in popular culture, people were amazed by the possibility to finally grasp and see the inner part of the reproductive bodies. And quite curiously, but not so strange if we think about that, ultrasound became popular and almost routinary in diagnostic practices in the same year when this issue of life was published. So this is an issue of life of 1965. And what we see on the very cover is a fetus, which, by the way, have the same stylistic significance that may help us, and in particular the viewers at the time, to think about the moon, the man on the moon. So all the space and quite sometimes not so fantascientific dimension. And this issue has been titled "The Drama of Life Before Birth." And Leonard Leadson, the photograph, tried to tell a story about how everyone was one a fetus, and how every one of us has to, just battle, let's say, its own fight during life. And these photographs made history for a particular reason. They are said to offering a portrait, okay, of the living embryo. And then after that, they inaugurate the so-called, from technical literature, fetal iconography. So much has been written actually about the ambiguity of the life represented in this issue. Why? Because actually these photographs were created by expertly staging embryos and aborted fetuses as alive. So we're actually not looking at fetuses in the womb, but we are looking at an aborted fetuses, staging with light and shadows in a way that make us believe that we're looking at life itself in the womb of a woman. So along that line, of course, feminist criticism has repeatedly stressed that the iconography of the fetus, which results also from ultrasound practices, because there's also, let's say, historical proximity, involves a total elimination of the maternal body. So both from this ultrasound and from this photograph, it's quite difficult to say that the pregnant person is depicted or even present, because we are only seeing at fetuses. As Balsamo explains, for instance, I quote, "This technological isolation of the womb from the rest of the female body promotes objectification of women and encourages the personification of the fetus." So the debate is still alive, actually, and this is a huge debate. I won't go in that direction, unlikely. But what really is important for today's discussion is that from 1960, so from 60s onwards, that kind of pictures and the ultrasound scans have been employed from both part of the political discussion, pro-choice and anti-abortion arguments. So pro-choice argument is that the fetal ultrasounds are photographic manipulations of reality because they are constructed in such a way as to focus exclusively on the fetus. This is what I said earlier about feminist reflections about that. So total elimination of the reproductive body. At the end of the day, we all have the fetus. This fetus lives by himself. We don't know, in an empty space somewhere, somehow. So this is a pro-choice argument. So those images are problematic for that reason. They're photographic manipulation. Pro-choice. Anti-abortion argument is that, quite on the contrary, fetal ultrasounds are yes picture, but picture that testimony that the fetus is a human being and a person and a patient and a citizen. So let's say that political polarity may treat ultrasound scans as pictures, even if they agree, they disagree, they believe the picture, they don't believe that, they say that these pictures are a sort of manipulation of reality. Still, ultrasound scans are photographs, are pictures, and they're trapped like that. So for trying to disentangle just a little bit and to problematize this assumption, I'm going to present right now two different families within the biomedical imaging. So the first one are the so-called mathematically elaborated images. We're talking about images that grasp a process, so in this case, brain imaging, and by producing a set of data. These images are not images stricto sensu. They're algorithmic reelaboration of some data and some processes. So they do not actually grasp a part of the reality, but through mathematical engineering and mediation, they show how a part of the body behaves, let's say. The second family is the one of mechanical produced images. So A mechanically produced image is the product of automatic imaging technologies that requires a direct interaction between the specimen and the machine, the output of which is an image displayed on screen and eventually printed. As we may say, this is actually the case of ultrasound pictures. So this the machine that mediates the underskin situation and finally the visual output. And in this case, its image making relies on basic acoustic principle, namely the visible mapping on the sound waves that hit the transducer. So in the case of mechanically produced images, the mediation is barely and merely technical. So mechanical. We don't have algorithm and mathematical software in this case. So at the end, if we want to pursue by following this distinction as proposed by Favaretto 2020 to the question, are ultrasound scans pictures? We can actually reply that, well, there is a continuity between two these scans and photographs. And this continuity is technologically justified and epistemically appropriate. It's technologically justified because of the type of mediation, the mechanical mediation, that of course makes the ultrasound more similar to a photograph than to a PET or to a fMRI. And the epistemical appropriateness, according to the author, is given again by the mechanical and technological process underlying. So it's okay in some sort it's normal, it's like it's part of the technological mediation to see to the scans as if they were photographs. So if things were like that, no really need of this talk actually, but things got more complicated with the advent of 3D and 4D scans. So why? First of all, because of the technological mediation. In case of 2D, its image making relies, as we say, on basic acoustic principles. So sound waves map the echo and just hit the transducer. From the transducer, the signals are elaborated through the machine and appear on the screen. So that's 2D scans. No big deal. When we're dealing with 3D ultrasound, things gonna really a bit messy, as a philosopher, I should say, because we have the first level in which the echo signals become actually 2D scans. And from that, some magic stuff happen. Because what happens that the really difference between 3D scan and 2D scans is the presence of light and shadow. Here, we probably see a baby. We see a baby with some facial expression that possibly do some stuff. In some 3D scans, I don't know, a friend of mine just sent me 3D scans of her baby. She was like, she's smiling, she knows that I'm here. So it may actually, these kind of images are also said to help to emotionally bond with the fetuses. So I have also a huge role in some case of bonding specifically from some pathological cases, pregnancy denial, or pregnant person experiences depression or other kind of mental issues at the moment of pregnancy. And from the perspective of a person pregnant, these images are actually super cute. But do they have like some content that may be used for saying that this fetus is a baby? Because this is, at the end of the day, all the question. Okay, there are two levels: the affective level, or a person who is pregnant who wants to meet her baby during the fetal ultrasound, and this could be like an amazing moment full of emotions, a moment that may be shared with the partner or the family or friends. Wow. On the other hand, sometimes 3D ultrasound are extrapolated from the context, and they're used as an anti-abortionist argument for saying that's a baby, you are killing it. And that's, of course, there is also another layer of complexity. I can't go there, but of course, it depends also from the weeks, because what we're seeing now is actually a fetus that has all the characters and the features of the babiness, and possibly, I don't know, but they may be ready to go out and live in the world. So we can't know that. But what's problematic is that actually these 3D scans add light and shadows in a way that cannot be extracted through the 2D. So more clearly, from the 2D scan and the 3D scan, what does it happen? Some magic, I'd say, because actually light and shadows are not detectable as echo signals. So from the very machine of ultrasound, we can't have this information. Light and shadows are impossible to detect through echo signals. But from 2D to 3D scans, the magic element is actually the use of video game and architecture render software. So that's quite provocative, but your 3D baby pictures bears more technological and epistemic similarity with Pikachu than with the living being inside you. So it sounds so that could be funny, problematic, whatever. But when we look at that picture, we have to be aware that the mediation, the mathematical engineering and algorithm mediation is quite powerful, and at the end really change the output of the image in per se. And yeah, Pikachu, I just lost me. Okay, I got it. And so given that, okay, we just started from visualization of the data. It seems to be like, okay, we have some data which are not visual, but that are then elaborated and processed, and at the end they become a visual output in the world. And this happens with different kind of biomedical imaging, from PET to fMRI, thermal imaging, and in our case, to ultrasound pictures. Ultrasounds are not all the same, especially right now, where there's a huge market, for instance, in a very fascinating to me phenomenon, the one of portable machine ultrasound. So people actually can buy or can just download on the app and buy some transducer and have their ultrasound doing by themselves while at home. And it's quite curious. Sometimes they're also 3D ultrasounds. But okay, so we have this kind of paradoxical relationship between visuality, photograph, and 2D ultrasound. And with the advent of 3D ultrasound, we may want to rethink from the very scratch the old argumentation about how ultrasound scans may actually act as if they were photographs and pictures. But as I say, I'm really interested in how those images may help us to renegotiate or to just confirm our presupposition about the world, about ourselves, about a human being. And Casini helps me in that by saying, I quote, "Medical images serve clinical and operational interests simply because images are used to decide in favor or against an intervention. Thus, operational images do not act like windows to the world, but as data that trigger decisions." So in this case, Casini wrote an amazing book on fMRI, and again, about this quite non-linear and complex relationship between images and technological mediation and diagnosis purposes. But in case, again, of fetal ultrasound, we face a situation similar. So these images are operational because they're not neutral. They do not picture a part of reality without saying anything. But the data extracting and re-elaborated may help us to trigger decisions. So that seems to be quite generalistic sometimes, but a classical example I do believe may help us in this case. So, for instance, before deciding whether opting for an abortion procedure or keep a fetus who may have a very short life expectancy, a parent-to-be is confronted with the sense-making enhanced by the ultrasound procedure. So just imagine this pregnant person lying and just having an ultrasound screening, watch something that, for instance, they were expecting to see some very severe abnormalities or physical issues in the fetus. And it's not the mere moment of, visual perception, but there are plenty of emotional and presupposition that enters into the game. So, for instance, what is this living being? Is that a human? It's not a human. It may be a human. So, which degree of humanity they have, according, for instance, to religious and cultural beliefs? And what are the effects and the emotions enhanced by the pregnancy, all elements that at the end enter into play in the decision-making processes. So in that case, those images are not only operational on the, let's say, diagnostic side, but also for the lived experience of the person. This idea of decision-making also has been explored by Verbeek. I want to add a little piece of the argumentation, say that not only we are confronted with decision making, but also with sense making because actually in also a very ordinary, let's say, scenario in which the fetus is healthy and the pregnant person is happy about the pregnancy and enthusiastic about meeting their baby, etc. Also in that case, it's really we may want to renegotiate the idea that ultrasound diagnostic practice is the same for everyone, because for some people it's anxiety, for other people it's excitement, for other people maybe also negative emotions, I don't know, related to personal experiences or past trauma. So what is important is that they are images that first of all enhance a certain sense making. So all process of understanding and make sense of what you are seeing. And I think that is kind of the ground part of the whole argumentation. So we can sum up and say that technological mediated image making of ultrasound practices affects the visual outputs and consequently the expectations and effective responses enhanced by ultrasound scans. So, of course, I'm talking about sense making as if it was a very crystal clear concept at the beginning. It's not. That's a good debate actually about what sense making is. Many contribution on that. Mostly from recognition accounts, but also sometimes sense making is employed in phenomenological literature in lato sensu. And for the sake of this presentation, I'd say that sense making is actually living beings' ways of being in the world, acting toward it, and ultimately giving meaning to its environment. So sense making actually covers, of course, different layers of one experience. For instance, sense making has to do with sensibility. So at the very ground level is the openness to the environment, is the way in which a living being, an organism, organize their own life in a given environment. And on the second level, it concerns the positive and negative balance of environmental condition, encompassing passivity, receptivity, and affect. On the third level, it indicates, I quote Thompson, the direction or orientation the living being adopts in response to significance and balance. So let's say in a phenomenological sense, the potential and teleological intentional. So what's interesting is that all those three levels contribute together to the processes of sense making, which are related to living being ways of being in the world. And this concept then is maybe that's my actual reading on that. That one of the inactivist contribution to the lay phenomenological idea that the world is already there, and yet it is continuously made and remade through our sensorium presupposition and previous experiences, as of course Merleau-Ponty teaches us. So a further characteristic of the sense making is that it is not neutral politically and socially, but as Butler and McKenzie argue, I quote, sense-making is a constitutively evaluative process. It discloses the world and the organism's own interaction in terms of their significance and valence. And I, of course, try to explain how this axiological attribution to the meaning of the word passes also through our social norms and rules and the way we renegotiate that. To conclude this very parenthesis of sense making, we may say that actually we touch the world, we smell it, we test it, we hear it, but mostly we ground our knowledge of the world on what we see and how we see it. So that may bring us to a quite debated idea that the hierarchy of the senses is in Western society and in Western way of thinking and being the world thinks that actually sight is the prominent and the most important sense. So in this case, it may actually apply to ultrasound, specifically if we follow like Duden idea that with the advent of ultrasound, pregnant people are not heard no more from the practitioner. So the practitioner take their knowledge of what's happening inside the pregnant body by looking at the image and not by listening to the first person perspective of the pregnant woman. Okay. So we say that ultrasound practices then disclose inner portion of the unseen body by translating ultrasound impulses into a picture to which onlookers effectively respond. So given their political and aesthetical potential, one might ask, how are these image making functional to the sense making they announce in diagnostic and not diagnostic settings? So this is actually a very difficult question to reply, but I try to do that considering Verbeck account of technology and how technology actually embodies moral values, and obstetric ultrasound as a mediating role, not only in making something visible, so in opening, let's say, a window on the pregnant body, but also in shaping, I quote, practices and interpretation of reality which form the basis of moral decisions. So in that case, as Casini said, ultrasound scans are operational images. And it's the technology itself that embodies a given material interpretation of reality, because it has to make a translation of what it perceives into a specific representation. And in this case, the scanner has to make a relevant translation of reflected ultrasonic sound waves into a picture on the screen. Yes, okay. I think I can do that. And okay, sorry about that. And so, very quickly to land, the resulting image that is not univocally understood by the parents to be as a baby picture, but instead it is reinterpreted through practitioner words and viewers' presuppositions. So it's not linear, the pictures and the understanding on that picture. And in particular, in our society, we are taught to see the features as a baby, and this attitude is cultivated through biomedical knowledge. and also practically through encounters with clinicians, personal experience, and third testimonies. That at the end of the day lies on the epistemic categorization of scientific images as representation of the truth. So that all visual organization depicts the fetus as a baby, and the related moral and political implication embodied by the ultrasound machine. So to be true, from its very origin, ultrasound scan had a clear and explicit moral-oriented goals. So we see actually what the machine wants you to see? Well, yes and no, but partially we can see yes. So this is Ian Donald in Glasgow, the first person actually using ultrasound for obstetrical purposes. And he actually was looking for tumors in the abdomen, but at the end, he actually say that also pregnancy is a form of tumor from an immunological perspective. So it becomes like a form of serendipity that the fetus arrived to be such an iconic image in our era. So this was the original ultrasound. So the pregnant woman was supposed to just lie back here. And quite interesting, the ultrasound technology has been developed during World War II, and for detective enemies, submarine enemies. So Ian Donald himself argued that there is not so much difference after all between a fetus in utero and a submarine at the sea. It is simply a question of refinement. So that's quite indicative for us, because Ian Donald by himself didn't not use the ultrasound only for diagnostic purposes, because sometimes he was not afraid to use the technology for this purpose when patients weren't referred to him for abortion. So he believed that the ultrasound image demonstrated unequivocally the individuality and the humanity of the fetus. So he would sometimes show ultrasound images to women seeking termination in a deliberate attempt to deter them from their chosen course of action. So does it ring a bell? I may think so, especially in some US states, when actually 6 states mandate that an abortion provider perform an ultrasound on each person seeking an abortion and require the provider to show and describe the image. And I just invite you to have a look at the Guttmacher Institute, because this ultrasound is not useful for diagnostic purposes. It's only a way to question women's agency seeking for an abortion. And okay, so again, we're talking about the relationship between fetus, baby, and when we sometimes anti-abortion activists have in common with commercial sonograph that claim that viewing images of the fetus promotes maternal bonding. So this identification with the fetus is again the identification between the fetus and the baby is again enacted by and helped by ultrasound practice now. And so there are some examples of the use of ultrasound pictures in anti-abortion rhetoric. This one is A License to Kill, and this one, Real Men Love Babies. And this is a reference to the heartbeat 18 days from conception. So all, let's say, the information captured through ultrasound are employed for making the case that the fetuses are babies from the very beginning. So that practices convey some moral values. We can discuss about that. Since they're very diffusion as diagnostics tools. So, and they still play a crucial role in anti-abortionist propaganda. And okay, let's just sum up the main issues of this presentation by looking at the very final slide. So we started by asking, what does the images have in common? And I try to show that the specific technological intervention into the production of the visual is the key to try to explore and possibly understand why fetuses are represented in certain ways in Western culture, and how their pictures may guide currency of emotions, desires, and sometimes ultimately actions. So that's the list of reference for whom interested. And thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you so much, Nicole, for your wonderful presentation. Unfortunately, we don't have time for questions. I would have had some, but I think you made a very important point today with using a route that has not been used so often. So
Yeah.
I'm very grateful that you accepted our invitation today. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Susie. Thank you so much. Good luck for everyone.